Math students, we have some examples of how to get your calculator to produce a scatter plot. This is for the material in Chapter 10. We'll be finishing up with this material, I believe, so do pay attention. It's probably the most calculator-intensive material we cover this semester. So follow me over to my other screen and we'll talk about the scatter plots. All right, a scatter plot give us a way to take data that exists as X, Y ordered pairs and plot those X, Y ordered pairs on the X, Y plane. The points are data points that you might get from a sample, say maybe age and height, age and education, income and education, anything that could be placed into two distinctly different variables. So we'll have X data and Y data, just like we had in algebra. And we're going to get our calculator to graph a scatter plot here. We've got a couple of different examples. It's really about the keystrokes, not so much about statistics on this particular example. So, example number 1. I will put the X stuff into list 1. I'll put the Y stuff into list 2. If you're here at home, what you're going to want to do is you're going to want to pause your calculator and have that done. Me, I've already got that data into list 1 and into list 2, so I'm ready to go. Now, we want to get our calculator to graph a scatter plot. I see a Y equals, it's not that, it's right up above in blue. I see stat plot. So I'll hit second and select stat plot, and I'll use my first plot and select that. And the first thing I need to do is to make sure that it is actually turned on. A big error students will make is to do everything correct except forget to actually turn the picture on. So you've done everything right, but your graph will not produce. I'll scroll down and I can select different types of graphs. The very first graph, the one that looks like a scatter plot, is a scatter plot. The X, second list 1, enter, and the Y, second list 2, enter. You can choose how the data is displayed. I really suggest selecting the first option there. The other two are less visible. The last one by far. Now, the plane is infinite in all directions. So how do we get our calculator to graph the correct portion of the plane that contains the picture of interest? This is truly the most important set of keystrokes in this process. Right in the middle, we've got a key that says zoom. I'll select zoom, then I scroll down my list here till I get to number 9, zoom stat. Your calculator is truly trying to help. I'll select zoom stat, and my calculator will give me the graph of the scatter plot there. We have X along the horizontal axis, Y along the vertical axis. Now, I can do a couple of things here. I can use the trace key to bounce back and forth between the different ordered pairs. And it'll go through the ordered pairs in the order in which they appear in the table. We get a cursor here, and we get the ordered pair down below. All right, let's run through the set of keystrokes again with another data set. Let me get rid of my picture, get rid of my data. So, completely different set of data. I got a little bit of a typo here. I've got this into list 5 and this into list 6, so I can do them all at the same time. On my calculator, under stat, I'll check my data. And if I scroll out here to list 5 and list 6, I'll find the X and the Y data. So list 5 and list 6 is where this data set lives. Second, stat plot. Plot number 1, make sure it's turned on. Everything is the same here, but I change my list to list 5 and list 6. I leave the mark as it is. And again, the most important set of keystrokes in this process, zoom down to zoom stat. I'll hit enter and I'll get a wonderful picture. Usually what I ask students to do is to reproduce the pictures you'll see here. Not a lot of detail is necessary on an exam, something like on the order of a picture much like this would be perfectly acceptable in an exam situation. We want to make sure you can do the keystrokes, etc. So you go ahead, use these keystrokes in chapter 10, and I'll have another video or two to flesh out this material in chapter 10. This is how we get the pictures. Thank you and goodbye.